uh, thank you. We're all aware of that now.
Sorry.
At the end of the program, we're going to have a link to a survey in the chat for you. We'd love to get your feedback on the event. Tonight, we're excited to share a conversation between two local podcast hosts, Ana González and Gisel Bello, about why it's important for people of color to produce and share stories that aren't often heard in mainstream media outlets. The discussion will be facilitated by Marta Martínez, Executive Director of Rhode Island Latino Arts. If at any point in the conversation you have a question or comment, you can leave that in the chat, but we'll also try to leave a little time at the end for questions. We'll probably wrap up around 7:30. Just you can keep your mic on mute during the conversation. If you want to say hi to everyone introduce yourself in the chat now, tell us where you're from, say hi, you're welcome to do that. So just before I introduce our speakers and facilitator for the evening, I want to tell you a little bit about What Your Writers Club if you're not familiar with it. We're basically a nonprofit serving Rhode Island's writers, illustrators, and podcasters with community events and practicums. We have a physical location in downtown Providence, but right now we're holding all our events and services online. And if you want to learn more about getting involved, we'll get a link in the chat. Membership is free to all local artists of color. And if you're interested in podcasting, which I'm guessing you may be since you're here tonight, the club holds a bi-monthly podcasting 101 every other month. It's offered online right now. And this is free to members, it's otherwise just $10. And our next class will be Thursday, July 15th. And it's just a basic intro to podcasting to help you get started. So if after this conversation you feel inspired to finally launch that podcast, you might be interested in taking that and just getting the tools that you need to do that. And that's really kind of how this event came about is Jillian and I were in conversation with Marta about podcasting and how What Your Writers Club and Rhode Island Latino Arts could come together and provide podcasting training to people throughout Rhode Island. So we actually did a podcasting 101 training at La Galleria with Rhode Island Latino Arts in person, and we also did one online. And those went really well, and yet we wanted to keep the conversation going, and we wanted to kind of dive in a little deeper into what a partnership between our two organizations could mean. And so this conversation tonight is a part of that conversation, and it's kind of a conversation that's developing as we figure out how our organizations can come together to provide resources to the community in Rhode Island. Let me go ahead and introduce our speakers. I've kind of talked enough tonight, and then I'll introduce our facilitator, Marta, as well. Ana, if you want to wave and let us know who you are. Ana González, there she is the host and producer of Mosaic, the public radio's award-winning podcast on immigrant experiences, a position she's held since 2019. Before working in public radio, Ana worked in documentary and commercial film. She and her partner, Jeff Mateus, ran Earth Studios, a small production company. In 2017, they released Almost Dope, their first feature-length documentary about Rhode Island's hip-hop history. Ana holds an undergraduate degree from Brown University, where she graduated magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa in 2015. And Ana's goal with her current work in audio storytelling is to amplify voices and stories that mainstream media overlooks, and to do so with the utmost empathy, nuance, and willingness to learn. Her main objective is to create sustainable communities around storytelling and empower people to speak their truths to power. Ana, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, this is exciting. I just said thanks.
Gisel Bello, if you want to wave, Gisel. There she is a New York City native, Afro-Dominicana, and proud first-generation graduate. She is currently a fourth-year medical student at the Warren Alpert School of Medicine. She's still in her scrubs. She made it tonight from her clinic. Thank you so much for being here, Gisel. Where she serves as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fellow. Growing up as the child of Dominican immigrants in the housing projects of Harlem had its perks and challenges, but writing was her way to catalog and process it all. For her, writing is synonymous with healing. In her writing, she delves deeper into the achy moments of her life, mining for nuggets of peace with what has transpired. Common themes in her writing are family, intergenerational trauma, women empowerment, love, healing, and sunshine. When she is not being a medical student or writing, she's empowering other underrepresented students to tell their own stories on her podcast, You Are Med. which can be found at yourmed.com or anywhere you get your podcasts. And we will go ahead and get links to both of our speakers' podcasts in the chat tonight, so you can definitely follow up and listen in. Finally, I want to introduce our facilitator for the evening, Marta. He's to my left, I'm not sure where, there you are. Marta V. Martínez founded Rhode Island Latino Arts in 1988, first called Hispanic Heritage Committee of Rhode Island. She is a community oral historian and project director of Nuestras Raíces Latino Oral History Project of Rhode Island. Marta is of Mexican heritage and was raised in El Paso, Texas, and currently lives in Warwick. And relevant to today's conversation, an internship during Marta's junior year at Providence College gave her an opportunity to work in television in Rhode Island and later in Washington, D.C. And while she ultimately decided not to pursue broadcast journalism, the experience taught her that working behind the scenes was more powerful than being in front of a camera. And Marta, I want to thank you for working behind the scenes on this event and bringing it together, making it possible. I'm just going to hand things over to you now and our speakers.
Thank you. Thank you all and welcome. I'm really glad to be here and I'm glad that you all could make it tonight. Yeah, so what led us here? So it was an opportunity that arose for me. I really was excited when Jillian and Jodie reached out. I had heard about What Cheer Club and I had visited them, but it wasn't until I actually came on site that I saw that they did podcasting. They just, they were doing projects with authors, promoting authors. And so podcasting, it seems like that seems to be a topic of conversation that comes up, or the topic that comes up in many conversations is like, oh, podcasting, I want to do that, and it always, even I said that, podcasting, I want to do that because I do a lot of interviews, but I really, wanted to know what went into podcasting. So we scheduled this, and I think the idea of maybe trying to bring the Latino community to learn how to do podcasting is why we work together. But then beyond that, we did two, as they said, workshops, and they were very similar. There was one, and then it turns out that the group who came to the first, some of them came back to the second, and they really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. And then when we talked about doing a third one, we thought, well, I felt there's got to be more. There's got to be a level where if we're going to do podcasting, let's learn how to do it from our perspective. And what that means is that, from a person of color. And as they mentioned, I was working in the field, and it really, you find yourselves as a person of color in the middle of a very lonely world. I mean, many of you who are people of color, or who, or those of you out there who have been in that experience, you find yourself, you enter very excited because you feel like you've made it, right? You've been told you've made it and you feel like you have, but then suddenly you feel like you haven't. So podcasting and that industry of television and radio, right now it's still a very lonely place. Actually, many industries are. Writing books, being authors, and then even more so, I mean, it's just a very wonderful, for me, a coincidence, even more so when you're a woman, a Latina. And I thought that was very interesting that the two, so we decided, let's look and see, let's find all the podcasters in Rhode Island. And we did. We have two people who are doing podcasting, the true sense of podcasting in Rhode Island. That says a lot. And they're two Latinas. That's cool, I think. So the two people that are of Latinx heritage are Latinas doing this. Mm-hmm. And the conversation that we've had as we were preparing for this is just that the place that we are, that we're in. Anna comes from, as her introduction was read, she works at NPR, and that's like a major industry. That's a big industry. Rhode Island is a very small state, and maybe you walk in and it doesn't seem like a huge place, but it's a huge industry that she's entered. And then Gisel, who's really, I mean, she her story to me was very inspiring, and how she ended up doing podcasting and what led her to do a podcasting, which we'll hear about, but also her field. She's a doctor, and she's a Latina, and she's a woman of color in that. So all of that comes into play in today. and how we're going to talk about podcasting, but just being a kind of trying to figure out how to tell your story. And you always find yourself, even if you're in a meeting room, in a boardroom, trying to tell your story just by being present, right? So I'm going to start talking, and I'm going to go ahead and ask. I'm going to ask Anna if you can tell us a little bit of what led you there. I should say, I knew Anna when she was a student at Brown, and I watched her movies and her grow in that documentary world, right?
Okay, not only that, Marta was in the movie. I interviewed Marta. That's how the way I met Marta is I had some internships in Rhode Island when I was working with some, and it did work out. It was internships go unpaid labor, and they just don't tell you anything. So I wound up at a meeting, and Marta was running the meeting, and I was like, oh, hi. And then 2 years later, I was like, do you remember me? I would like to interview you for a very, so Marta was actually in my mind, and I've said that we've spoken one other time, at the same thing, and I always referred to her as La Reina. She's been doing this for decades and decades, and she's talk about lonely, but Lone Ranger style, out there, on the streets. She was walking up and down Broad Street before anybody thought to care about people who are moving to Broad Street. So all my respect and admiration to Marta, because when she says it's lonely, it's she's been the one and only, and I think so that's so everyone should recognize.
You better recognize.
You better put respect on Marta's name. So that's,
oh my God.
That's how I know Marta. And then so how I kind of got into this was I started out with playing music in college. That thing there is a double bass.
That thing.
That thing is my thing. It's very important. It's a very expensive piece of furniture that I get the privilege to move from apartment to apartment, but. It did get me into college. I played in jazz bands. I played in some salsa bands too. And so my family's Puerto Rican and Irish. My dad's from Puerto Rico. My mom's from Long Island. And so that was a way I really connected to being Puerto Rican, was playing salsa music, aguinaldos, just really connecting to people, playing a bomba, all these things. So after college, or at the end of college, I was like, I don't want to play music for a living. I need more stability in my life than this. And I'm a morning person. I can't be out late. I learned about myself. So I was like, oh, what if I scored TV and film, made music for it? And that didn't work out. Well, kind of worked out. But so I wound up kind of making all of the films. So doing video, doing documentary work, and then and scoring those things as well, writing the music, editing them. And then after a couple years of that, I realized that I really liked the story part of it the most. I liked getting to know people, finding people, talking to people, and imagining a story, figuring out what we needed, what scenes, just imagining how to tell a story. And then I loved editing it, but I did not like the camera part of it, and I wasn't that good at it, and I didn't really care about it. So I kind of got into podcasting through teaching how to use cameras in Philadelphia. So I was teaching middle and high schoolers how to use cameras through their public radio station, which is a big public radio station called WHYY. And through that, kind of got introduced to more audio storytelling and people like that, and started applying for more full-time positions in content creation through public radio stations. And this position opened up to tell stories about from immigrant experiences and communities in Rhode Island. And I'd done some work in documentary film, and I knew people like Marta, so I was like, let me try this out. I got the job, and I've been here ever since. So that's kind of my origin story.
Oh my God, hearing you say that you love editing made me cringe a little bit.
I know, it's your arch nemesis.
Yeah, talk about that. What is your experience? I mean, you can lead up to that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can also answer that question just so that there's some sort of like chronicity. So hi y'all, my name's Giselle, like I was introduced. I am a Rhode Island transplant. I've been living here for 12 years now, and it's lovely. I do not have any formal training or like experience in podcasting or interviewing people or films, and editing makes my stomach hurt. But really, I got started because, as Marta pointed out, I think similarly in radio and audio and the industry could be really lonely for like women and Latinas and people of color. Same thing in medicine. I mean, basically pick an industry and like it'll probably be the same. And so for me as a medical student, I didn't necessarily have like a very straightforward way to medicine. I had an experience when I was like 7 years old, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be a doctor because my doctor let me hear my mom's heart, and like, you know, very cliche. But I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And that's pretty much how I've continued throughout. I like sometimes still have no idea what I'm actually getting myself into. And it was only for the stories that mentors shared with me about their own struggles and stories of triumph. And under like very specific circumstances, like the only other Dominican woman from New York that was also a medical student, but was like 1 year ahead of me, the stories that she shared with me that really helped me process and live through and survive and thrive in medicine. And I feel like the experiences that we have, because there aren't that many of us, we're under so much pressure to survive and like do the best that we can, that we never actually let ourselves share when we have missteps, or share when we're struggling, or you know, like any sort of friction that is created in your journey, we don't feel okay sharing because there's so much pressure on us anyways. And as my friend Denise that I just mentioned says, you know, sometimes like we're the ones that like nothing bad is going to happen to us. Our parents aren't worried about us because we're the ones that went through, and we're the ones that like, you know, are more likely to not, you know, for lack of a better term, I'm going to use my favorite word, fuck up, you know? And so no one really like checks on us because we're like, oh, it's fine. But then because we get used to that, we don't really speak up about our issues or our challenges. And so that's where You Are Med grew out of. I have like a joke that's actually not a joke. It's kind of sad that I could pretty much expect some shit to go down with my family like quarterly. You know, every 4-ish months, I'm like 3-4 months, whatever quarterly is. I'm like bracing for something to happen in my family that's going to take me away from my studies that I'm going to have to deal with and all this other stuff. And so sometimes medical school is not my number one priority. And that's a consequence of being a first generation, being a Latina, not having as many mentors to move forward. So I wanted to capture people's stories the way that they wanted to tell them and put them out there for the future generation of medical students and providers to be able to like hear someone from across the country share a story that sounds like theirs and be like, oh, okay, I hear pieces of my story in that. Cool. They made it. I can make it too. And then, so a little bit just very quickly on the no formal training. This has been a steep learning curve for me. I started doing this because I wanted to capture people's stories. I literally just wanted to be like, tell me your story, and that's it. And that's not what it ended up being. It was like, tell me your story. Okay, now I interviewed you for an hour. Now I have to spend like 3 hours editing this piece, and I hate it, but I know it's so important. So I'm gonna keep at it.
I can't believe you do this in addition to med school, honestly. Like every time I think about it, I'm like, what? When? Do you sleep? How does your skin look so good? Because your skin is always on point, your hair is always on point. I'm like, Gisel's like, I don't
It's
know
self-care.
I know, but like it's amazing. So it's just
literally the thing that I do is like whenever I wake up and I feel shitty, I'm like, okay, I have to do my hair and I have to moisturize because it'll make me feel better.
Yeah, right.
The little things, yeah. Well, I wanted to point something out in what Gisel said. What you're saying is that the lack of asking for help, and I think there's this complex thing that we deal with, and something that Marta said too, like being the only one in the room or it's lonely, like that can breed somewhat of a competitive edge among people who are Latino in general, more specifically like who identify as female and Latina, or part of Latinx community, people in color in general, when there are less of us in the room. And also, like, I recognize I'm super white passing, so I like go in between these worlds pretty easily. And I see this competition sometimes, like a hardness. And something that's cool about this event is that it's not that. It's like it's celebration, and like and just because there are a few of us doesn't mean we should be at odds. And I think so I just want to say, like, thank you for Marta to organize this and like for what you're to support it. And I think there needs to be a softness that we all treat each other with, like that self-care goes beyond just us. It's like how can we be kind to other people and that are in our same situation instead of holding them to a higher standard than we would hold other people to, other white people, so that's just something I wanted to
it's a scarcity mindset, right? It's like there's only 3 spots when really it's like that's what in med school we call people like that gunners, and I don't know where that term came from, but that's a thing. And it's just like, the sharp elbows, like just cutting people as you move forward. And like I was gonna say that's cool and all, but it really isn't cool. And it's someone once said on a panel that it's like internalized white supremacy to be moving through life in that way. And I think in many ways what as my bio said, and also like in the stories that I collect, I am really trying to like work through all the sticky stuff, tell you I love you, and like put you into my community because it's funner that way,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes when you're in the middle of all that, yes, you are aggressive, but have you ever asked yourself, like, what am I doing here? What
constantly
into, and how do I get out? Right? You kind of feel that way. I mean, you're so empowered, and yes, we're always on edge. Okay, I need to prove it to who? To myself, to my family, to my community, to other Latinas. And I mean, here we are being examples, right? We're the only podcasters. You two are the only podcasters. But have you ever asked yourself, why am I here? What did I do? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like Gisel, you go first.
Okay.
I know.
I can talk forever. So for me, I ask myself this question constantly, especially because I grew up in the projects on 125th Street in Harlem, where I have multiple friends from middle school and high school that have been murdered to gang violence. I have a lot of the friends that I had as soon as I came out of high school became pregnant. So there was nothing, I guess, like if you were to go from a strictly demographic standpoint, there was nothing in my demographics, like child of immigrants, like woman, like Dominican woman, grew up in the projects, like low socioeconomic status. There was nothing that like pointed to one of those roads being my story. And that's like not to say that becoming pregnant or anything like that at a young age. Like, I'm not saying anything about that. But so yeah, there was no sort of like road forward. And for me, if it wasn't specifically for like people that saw like the little spark in my eyes while things were sort of crumbling around me, especially with like really rough situations at home with like a very severely depressed mom and all these things. If it wasn't for like people being like, I don't know what it is about you, but like, I don't know, let's do something. Specifically like my teachers who would listen to me, talk through situations at home and would give me sort of a point of reference of like, that's not okay, or like, okay, that's hard, and here are ways that you can deal with it. And specifically a mentor of mine, Amanda, always got to shout her out. She was like the epitome of what I thought was a modern working woman. She is this like white woman that used to work at Goldman Sachs, and we got paired in a mentoring program somehow. And she would like pick me up, on a monthly basis, take me to a restaurant. It had to be a cuisine that I had never tasted, and also a cuisine belonging to a country that she had traveled to, because she would bring pictures and stories and all of that. And so with her, I started to see the world outside of my block, outside of like my 5-block radius. And that, every time I talk about Amanda, I get emotional and like want to cry, because I really do feel like people like her showed me that there were different ways, and that whatever I dreamt up, there was a road there. Whether they didn't tell me about whether it was treacherous or not, but they assured me that there was a road to wherever I wanted to go. So as much as I ask myself what made me quote unquote special, I know wholeheartedly that if it were not for people who held my hand and told me that I could, and like took me out to try Indian food and told me stories about their travels to India, I would not be here.
Mm. Yeah, and Anna, you specifically, you're in that wide industry. I'm going to just say it.
Yeah,
I'm
say
sure
it.
you ask yourself, what am I doing here? But what do you think that it was about you that they saw, and then once you got in there, did you feel that you had to keep? Do you feel like you need to keep proving yourself as the person that?
Oh yeah, all the time. So I had a very different upbringing from Giselle, and I'm extremely privileged in some ways, in that I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, and then outside of New Haven, Connecticut, and my parents split up, and there was a lot of messed up family stuff, and but I spent the majority of the time with my mom, who's white. Like it was like just me and my mom, who's white, and she gave me this unbridled white person confidence. It was like really like it's insane, the difference, So I went through school, school was my thing. I was so good at school, and I was like, I thought it was hot shit, and so I was like, if I do anything, it's because I earned it. Until I was applying to colleges, and I was like, I'm gonna go to Brown. And I was like cocky white woman. I was like, it is my birthright to go to Brown. It's like, I will go. It's a real mentality. And then I got in, and I remember multiple kids saying, "Oh, it's only because you're Puerto Rican." Right. And I was like,
right.
What? Like, y'all think that about me? I thought I was doing okay. I thought it was like part of the club.
Right.
Like every Emma and Rachel and Jennifer, I was like, you are me and I am you. No, you're Ana González. You're not Emma. So, so that was when I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe did I earn it? It was less like, do I belong here? More like, did I earn it? Or is this a form of tokenism? Did they choose me because they needed someone for their statistics? And I still grapple with that, did they hire me? Would I have gotten this job if I wasn't Spanish speaking and specifically about immigration? I don't know. I don't know if they would have hired me just to cover the news. And I think about that still, like, do you want me, so there's this less of like, do I belong here? And more like, I know I belong here and I have to tell myself that, but what opportunity, like, are there really endless opportunities for me, or will I get pigeonholed into always being the one? And so then I have to like prove to myself, okay, well, I can do stories in Spanish. I can be that person, even though I wasn't raised really in that culture entirely, like I feel comfortable in both, but like there's a certain level of my Spanish that I try to break out of it. It's hard to get beyond it, like I could do a conversation, but I don't know if I'd be able to do something like this in Spanish. So it's kind of that, those are the issues, the grapplings I have is like, well, I'm not fully white and I'm not fully Puerto Rican, Latinx, but I am this in between that goes between both, and like which spaces really want me for who I am and which spaces want me to check a box and get money from the government, so.
Yeah. And then, but in terms of either of you, do you feel like, or maybe more, Anna, do you feel that you had to change up? I know you've changed your format a little bit.
Yeah.
Because yeah, what?
To fit it, well, so podcasting is podcasting is like a money thing at the end of the day. It takes funding, and anybody who's ever worked on a podcast or tried to make one knows that it takes time, and and that time is money, So I think for Mosaic, we had 2 seasons that were the format is what we call narrative documentary. So in the industry, that means I am following a story for the episode and I am narrating it with different scenes. And it's more of a story writing thing. So I'm going to a bunch of different places, recording a bunch of different interviews and things that are happening. And then I'm assembling it all and then writing a bunch of narration and then recording that. So that's narrative documentary. This 3rd season, which we just launched 2.5 weeks ago, is more conversational, and Gisel's podcast is also more conversational, and it is a lighter lift. It's still a lot of work, but it is less work than narrative documentary in that you can produce it more quickly, because you're just by the very fact that like you're usually just having one conversation, maybe 2, whereas for a narrative documentary you're having dozens, maybe, so that's really an issue of funding, and because it is not necessarily the priority of a lot of news stations to produce something like this, because especially with the pandemic year, funding is cut across the board. I work for a news station, so they're putting and this was a grant funded show, so the emphasis is and will always be the daily news. What's happening? Where are the fires? Who got shot? What's the case number today? What's going on in the General Assembly? So that isn't something that you run into in the industry. Is certain shops value news and certain shops are just podcasting, and then you have to deal with like the saturation of how many dang podcasts are out there. There is something for, if you are a pregnant woman who likes NASCAR, I bet there's a podcast for you. I can't believe I just made that up on the spot, but I did.
I'm sure I can look that up on Apple Podcasts and it'll come up.
I bet you could, yeah.
Yeah. And but you, Gisel, you had a specific reason, right?
Yeah, and I would say
podcasts, right?
No, I knew nothing about podcasts. The joke that I say is that had I known how much work it was going to be, I probably wouldn't have started one because it does take a lot of work and time. But I would say, your question was about like, did we feel like we had to change in some way? And I'm not affiliated with like any organization. This is like me literally under the covers or like downstairs in my basement, like under some like a cardboard box that I put paneling on and just like create, it's very DIY. And even I, for a second, you know, while I was making my first 2 episodes, had moments in which I was like, oh, why do I sound like that? Like I should pronounce things differently, or like that was weird, or like, wow, my laugh is so, you know, for the first time, we all speak out in the world and we don't ever really get to hear ourselves. So it's just like, I don't know what I sound like. I know what like the immediate sound of my voice sounds to my ears, but in conversation and having to like listen to audio, and when you're editing, this is another thing that drives me insane, that you like go back and replay and go back and replay and go back and like do different things to be able to edit, and like hearing myself. I reached points where I was like, I'm gonna just delete everything I say because I sound crazy. But and having to like sit with that discomfort, you know, eventually you get used to what the sound of your voice sounds like. But I think that like the questions that I had to ask myself were like, okay, why do I think that I need to pronounce things differently? Is it because like, who am I listening like in order to then say, this is how I need to edit, or this is how I need to sound, or whatever? Like, and honestly, like those are not the people that I'm making these stories for. Like they're the people that say I'm gonna instead of I'm going to, because that's just how I talk. I say I'm gonna go over there. And you know, just like the slang, and like I try not to say fuck a lot. Like I said, like that's my favorite word in like normal language. So I
love, okay, I interviewed Gisel for my podcast because obviously she's great, and why wouldn't I? And I was like, Gisel, how would you introduce yourself? And so I'm so used to like code switching. Like I interview like professors or like state people or like people on the street. And Gisel was like, I can't remember exactly what you said. You could probably do it word for it. It was like, I'm Gisel Bello, as mommy calls me, Gisel Bello. And then you listed this thing. It was like, I am a 4th year medical student, I'm loud as fuck, I'm the life of the party, I'm a lover of the sun. And I was like, this is great. Like,
literally,
you know, like, and it was like this. And then you described something else as both malignant and whack in the same sentence. And I was like, this is who this person is.
Yeah, because that's literally like what I bring to the table as a human, as like a doctor, let's say, is that I grew up in Harlem. I know Spanish, I know English, I know slang, I love to curse, I'm loud, like all of these things in which like you compare me to 90% of medical students or like medical providers, and they would be like, what? And that when I sit and compare myself to like my colleagues, I'm different, but you know, I've done all this work or whatever it's called to just like feel really comfortable in my skin. And like, I love that I'm loud, and I love that, like, you know, I am the life of the party sometimes, and that like curses fly out of my mouth, you know, to the point in which like my partner sometimes is like, ooh, and I'm like, this is who I am.
I think that's kind of why you did this. You never.
That's exactly why, because
podcast and you're like, hey, when am I going to listen to something that's me, right? And that would attract others like me, maybe that they would enjoy that kind of banter, right? As opposed to very formal kind of thing. No matter how many degrees they have,
right?
To sound, you know, like your friend, right?
And my whole thing is like, if I'm gonna sit here and mentor students and tell people that it is okay to be who you are and to take up space and to like rep where you're from and like talk about the sensitive points in your life and like draw strength from that, I can't then go behind the microphone because I'm imagining some like random person somewhere in life that like hates how loud I laugh and is gonna like write a bad review. You know, like that's not the person that I'm capturing these stories for. The person that I'm capturing these stories for is that little girl in Harlem at 12 years old who was trying to be a doctor, but was like, I don't know how to do this. And I also find that like in life, I form such great relationships because like with me, what you see is what you get. I'm not like trying to put up any fronts. And similarly with patients, I'm like that with patients, and it creates so much more trust, right? And so, you know, the whole thing about this is like, why do our stories matter? Because they humanize us, because they strip away veils of perfection, right? Because in you telling me a story about a difficult time that you've had, and I know nothing about you, all the assumptions that I did make about you go out the window, right? And so that's it. So I hate editing, but I do it because of how important it is to like hear stories of people's challenges, and also have your mind have that dissonance that is like, damn, but she's a doctor and doctors have their shit together all the time. And it's like, yeah, but also these are all the things that I did, you know?
Yeah. So Anna, it seems
Yeah.
Giselle's podcast is very specific to med students.
Hmm.
May not, but it may evolve. Who knows? But every story you do is different. So what how do you maneuver your way through that? How do you decide what you're gonna write about? So you're doing Mosaic, and that's a really beautiful word to describe what you do. You do a bit of everything, and in terms of diversity, you could be talking to a Guatemalan one day and somebody from Lebanon, right? And another.
Yes.
So it's not just Latino. So how do you
Yes.
go through that to decide?
I think well, first, like on a technical level, I do make diversity maps and audits of myself so like literally I will draw out, okay, what's every story I've ever done? Who is the main person? Like, what are their genders? What is their country of origin? How old are they? What's their religion? And I will map it out and I'll see where it's heavy and I'll see, okay, well, what else could I try to do? So I'm actually extremely conscious of that for that reason, where it's like I want to be able, with this platform, I want to be able to bring visibility to as many different types of stories as possible. And with that, I don't want to go off of like the percentages of like who lives here and what the United States is made off of at all. Because if I did that, I wouldn't get to some of these really beautiful stories. I remember season 1, there was and actually my co-producer at the time, his name is Alex Nunes, and he's of Portuguese descent. And so one of the stories he produced was of this man named Kamal Elias, and he was from Iraq, and he was Yazidi. He is Yazidi, which is an extreme minority religion, and he witnessed the genocide of his people. And he also helped translate for the American troops stationed in Iraq at the hospital, and that's how he got to the United States. But he witnessed the genocide of almost his entire family, and he's one of the only Yazidi people who lives in Rhode Island. And he just wants to move to Nevada so that he can live with his sister who's there. And that's all. And like, it's this heartbreaking story where like, and Yazidi religion is not written down. It's all oral history. So it mandates that you live among your people in order to preserve it. And he has no kids. He doesn't have a wife. So stories like that, where it's like, really, like, if you think you're alone, you are not Yazidi living in Rhode Island alone. And like, I think anybody I get chills thinking about him. And he's such a beautiful person, and he's a poet, and he has a master's thesis on like,
but like, of course he is.
Yeah, like, exactly. Yeah, he was raised in the mountains of Iraq, and like, I don't know. And so he's a translator now for other refugees who speak his dialect of Arabic in Rhode Island. And so when I look for a story, when I maneuver through a story, I first and foremost just want to relate to this person as if they were a member of my family. I want to know, like, I have the love in place, I have the empathy in place, even if they've done messed up stuff. Even if, like, I've talked to convicted felons who've done serious crimes that they were convicted of and have admitted to, and that first leads with empathy and compassion, because there are reasons why you committed those crimes. There are reasons why you wound up where you wound up, and I want to know those reasons. I don't have to agree with them, but I am not going to judge you for them. I'm simply going to absorb what you're telling me. And those are the stories that you do not see very often in media because it's not newsworthy, but like it is so human, and I think we all need to, and like just like immigration is a way to make an excuse for me to talk about these things, but I really value that kind of not only diversity of like who you are, but what you've done and what you dream of and where you want to be.
Yeah. And how do you find people?
There's a lot of
For
different
real.
It depends. I think what there are a couple of different things, and I feel like any person who works in podcasting who does this kind of work will tell you that it is a couple of different things. One is like always be following the news, always know what's going on, what's the big thing, what are the laws that are passed. That's like kind of baseline. Number two is get out there, go to different restaurants, go hang out with people, be a social being. You can't just find things by your computer. And number three, go into history. If you like, talk to old people about what they think is interesting, because like I have neighbors who are just old Rhode Islanders, and I've asked them and they've told me cool stories. And like and then I go and I look into those stories. Look at where you live. Look at the zoning laws of where you live. Go into like city archives of what happened on your block 100 years ago, and you can find really cool stuff. So that's part of it. And then meeting strangers is a really great way. I met one guy because he was my Uber driver. I met one and he's like, oh my god, yeah. Season 1, episode 9, Guillermo. He was like, I got in the car and he was like, I was like, Guillermo, hey, and he was like, where you from? You said my name perfect. And I was like, my dad, I was Puerto Rican. He was like, all right, cool. What do you do? And I was like, I work for the radio. He was like, what do you do at the radio? And it just became the thing. He's like, I got a story. I was like, and then he told me the story. I was like, yeah, you do. So that's one that's fun the few times. I don't always say trade numbers with your Uber driver, but in that case, I did.
Right. I was about to say.
I was like, he already knows where I live. Like, I have a pit bull. I have a partner. Like, I'll be okay. But like, so I think just, being open to the story when you see it. I saw some quote that was like, a good story is just what happens to people who know how to tell them. So that's kind of, like anything that happens to you could be a good story. You just have to be open to telling it.
Right. And Giselle, so you're in the medical world. How do you keep the stories flowing when it's medicine,
Interestingly, although like the one thing that everyone that I've interviewed has in common is that they are in the medical fields. I don't want to talk about anything that has to do with medicine. Like I strictly want to talk about your experience within the medical field. I don't want to talk about what hemorrhage you stopped or like how that was crazy. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about how does your existence as an underrepresented student in medicine, how that's been, and I try to keep it like open-ended because I think that there's also so much power in being an underrepresented person in medicine, like walking into a patient's room and they like similarly like happened to Anna talking about where you from. Like as soon as you walk in, patients being like, you Dominican, like I can tell. And like that sort of experience that happens that makes patients feel really comfortable and like makes trust much easier to get and things like this. And so for me, I have so far interviewed people that I've crossed paths with and that I've thought have been interesting to me from like a human perspective. So I told my story, which was so nerve-wracking and made me feel like I was gonna just vomit. But it was a good practice because now you know like what your guests might feel when they put their stories out there. I did the piece on myself. I did a piece on Kay Elise Green, who is a diversity fellow at BU. And I thought she was like, her and I crossed paths on Zoom. She's like my first Zoom friend ever. And then my second Zoom friend ever was Mohammed Aref, who is now a general surgery intern, and he also is a poet. And both of these people I've like heard speak and been like, oh my God. Just the reflections of their experiences have been really wonderful. The next one that I did was with my friend Denise that I mentioned earlier, who was like the only other Dominican woman at Brown who was 1 year ahead of me. And like, literally I met with her once and she was like, I got you, like, let's do this. We're gonna get you into med school. We're gonna get you specifically into Brown. Like, I'm gonna do this whole thing with you and it's gonna be great. And she is like my big sister, my big little sister, because she's short, but my big sister, and who tells me like it is, and ultimately, no matter what, has like my best interest at heart. And you know, next episode, I'm doing a story on a trans male med student and how being a trans person impacts the way that he can move through medicine. And so mostly I think the stories that I've been telling are the stories that like I think are personally interesting from like a human perspective, because that's really my goal, to be like, hey, doctors are humans too. And not only are we human, but also like underrepresented doctors like go through a whole bunch of stuff. And here's what it is. Yeah. But also like funny things happen too, because we are underrepresented. So it's like both the challenges, the triumphs, and like the magic of our existence.
And I had asked you both to tell me which is your favorite episode. So I had two questions that I asked you. Which is the episode that you made, and then which is your favorite podcast episode that maybe inspired you to do podcasting? So, do you have one that any of those that you just ticked off, Giselle?
Oh, okay, I'll go first. So the podcast that inspired me to start podcasting is called the Hey Girl podcast by Alex L. It's a podcast where she basically started interviewing a whole bunch of her friends about their experiences as women, to try to put more stories about women and women of color out there. And I think she has like a really special way of holding tenderness, especially during really difficult moments of stories that are shared. And I'm always like either like crying or laughing. And I'm like, I mean, her voice to me has grown so familiar. I've never met this woman in my life, but like, I feel like she's my friend. And like, every time I hear her voice outside of her podcast, like if she comes up on Instagram or something like that, I'm just like, Alex, you know, it's another sort of, yeah, part of my life, you know, being a woman, that's like really wonderful to hear other people's experiences with their womanhood.
I don't know if you all shared links, but if they did, I don't know, we can put them on the chat so people can.
Okay. It's the Hey Girl podcast, and she starts all her episodes by saying, "Hey girl," which is like so cute. And then I don't know if I have a favorite, because I feel like I only have 4 episodes out, and I feel like all the conversations that I've had have been so special to me for different reasons. I think my favorite thing though about creating podcasts is hearing feedback from people, or being like, oh my God, that really resonated, or like, wow, this person's so amazing. And like, mostly also the guests that I've had have shared with me, like, I didn't even know that like my story sounded like that. Like, that was so great, and are so thankful about the care that's taken to be able to tell their story. So I guess like in a way, me seeing how like wonderful these people are and being like, oh my God, let me just tell your story.
Yeah, I think it's probably like you said, the the responses you get from them afterwards or from people?
From them is like the best. Like, obviously you want your audience to grow and be impacted, but like from them specifically, I'm like, it means a lot because I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And thank you for trusting me with your story.
And
yeah,
how
there's
I know.
yeah, like Giselle said, it's so hard to pick a favorite episode. I have 45 right now, and Giselle, you're
Goals.
number 40. I know you're 40. You're 47, I think. So
Which one do you like the best? It's like, which experience do you still, I mean, it sounds like that one
yeah,
you talked about always comes back to you.
yeah, those are definitely like the one I said. Guillermo was the Uber driver is awesome. Like Giselle said, one of the last like narrative documentary style ones was a two-parter about this man named Juan Garcia. And he's Guatemalan. He's an art organizer. You probably know him, Marta. And he's an amazing person. But the coolest thing was that I got an email from his son afterwards. And so he had a family that he left in San Antonio, Texas. Like he got divorced from his first wife and he moved here and he had a second family. And in the story, I kind of gloss over it. Like it didn't work out. He had 2 kids and he left. But his grown son was like, thank you for making this podcast because I feel like I met my dad and I never knew him before. And I understood his story and I understood why he had to leave. And I was like,
I like have goosebumps.
I know. I was like this because his story is amazing, and I think he never told this to anybody before. I think in that way, in like such an intense way, where I'm asking him not just what happened, but how did you feel when that happened? And it's kind of like therapy in that way, in that they say like, oh, I was scared, or the emotions I had were terrible, and then you get why they had to do this thing. So it was like a real cathartic. Every episode has this catharsis to it. Even historical episodes like this. Oh, I could go on, but there's this other thing that comes to 2 things. One was this other episode that I did with this woman named Zenaida, and she's Puerto Rican, and just like she escaped domestic violence in her marriage and came to the United States, and then to join her mom. And then the day her episode came out was the anniversary, just by coincidence, the anniversary of her mother's death.
Aww.
And her mother's name is the same exact name as my great grandmother. And so it just felt like this weird. So those experiences of like, I feel like I am making this impact and I don't care who listens, like it is working, like, so those are, I mean, and the list goes on and on and on. And just so many times, like grown old men have called me in tears saying, and they all call me Anna. They're like, Anna, it was just so beautiful. I'm like, you're welcome, Ralph. Yeah. So those are my favorite. I don't have a favorite. Those are great experiences, but I do have, here are 2 different podcasts I'm going to put in the chat. This first one is La Brega, which is from WNYC Studios and is co-created with Futuro Studios. And it is awesome. It is so good. It's new. It didn't get me into podcasting. Honestly, like one show got me into podcasting. It was more the process and like a natural progression for me as like writer, journalist, storyteller. But these are shows that have inspired me to keep going, to be better. This next one, Dolly Parton's America, also from WNYC, but hosted by Dad Abumrad, who is the creator of Radiolab, and he's like a titan of the podcast world in a lot of ways. And these 2 are narrative documentary style. La Brega is a little investigative, another buzzword in the podcast world, but they're following stories and experiences, and they're short-lived, and they're really ornately edited and produced. And La Brega is especially incredible because it is about the Puerto Rican experience, both on the island and in the diaspora. And it's the first time I ever heard people with Puerto Rican accents speak for more than a soundbite. Like,
wow.
Like it is so cool, like to hear people speak the way that my family speaks, like not a newscast, not, Univision, not Sábado Gigante, but like, like a cool, nuanced version of what it means to be from Puerto Rico and to have
Mhm.
this history, and it gets into these very specific things like the water tank in the town of
Yeah.
Levittown, Puerto Rico, and how Levittown relates to the rest of Levittowns, and the basketball tournament that happened, the World Championship basketball, like
think
so
just
cool.
the name,
I started listening to that because of y'all, because y'all were like, "Oh, this is a great show," and I'm like, "It is."
It is.
and just the name alone. I mean, I had heard about it when it was about to be cast out, but then I'm like, what is a brega? What is that? I had never heard it. I'm from Mexico, and that's not a term we use. And just that alone, and I'll say it to Puerto Rican, and they're like, oh, and then they'll give me all this. I don't know if it's a Dominican term, but
Yeah,
they'll go.
bregando,
Bregando, yeah. Estoy
bregando. It's
bregando,
like
yeah.
all the bullshit.
When you
Yeah.
when you say it, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it, but I had no idea La Brega, and so just that alone, the name, it just grabs you. If you're Puerto Rican, somebody said that, it's like they just reached out and pulled me right in. So those are I mean, right now, those are the best podcasts that can do that, right? I don't know if it has to be with a name, but also that leaves you kind of like what you just said on those experiences I mean, I think you should, I don't know if there's ever a time where you could tell on air those experiences that you had, because what happened with Juan and his son, that is amazing to know that you
Yeah.
reached part of his life that
So
he
powerful.
out, and that you really made a change, made a big difference. I haven't been paying attention, but are there any questions on there that we'd like to answer?
Yeah, this might be a good time. In fact, I don't know if you'd like me, I can go ahead and read the ones I'm seeing here. Yeah, we have a couple in the chat. Ramona's asking, if given that there are so many podcasts out there, is there room for one more? Also, do you care if people are listening to you or whether you have an audience? So you've been speaking to the meaningful relationships, like that story you just told. Maybe that's enough, but do you care if you have an audience? Maybe how do you get an audience, grow an audience?
I would say, I'll start in saying absolutely there's room for one more, especially, do you know how many white people make podcasts? Like, do you know how many like English speaking people make podcasts? There aren't enough, specifically Spanish speaking or Spanglish or people who can exist in both worlds. There are not enough. There are not enough women. There are not enough women of color. There are not enough really thoughtful, genuine, truthful podcasts out there by women of color or gender, like whatever gender you identify with. Like, so if it is your specific truth, tell it. And if you want to do that on a podcast, go for it. If you think podcasting isn't your medium, that's okay too. Like, as long as you get it out there. But that's like asking, do you think there's too many people on this planet? Like, well, there are a lot of people on this planet, but they're all different. And if you want to like assert yourself and tell your story, by all means, do it. The audience part, if you're doing a good job, it will come. I think that I have the luxury of being supported by a station where I get an inherent amount of people listening. Do I wish it was more? Of course. My ego would love to be like top 10 podcasts on whatever app. It's probably not going to happen anytime soon. You need to have a little bit of muscle to do that. But if you can make a meaningful impact, whatever you do, go for it.
Mm-hmm. I would second that. I think I also, because I have no idea what I'm doing. Well, I have some idea now, but when I started, I had no idea what I was doing. I think I just, there's so many like moving pieces, especially if you're not supported by a station and have people that like can do your editing and your sound and all of those things for you. There's like interviewing the person, getting the conversation recorded. There's editing the conversation. There's like picking what music you want to put on the podcast. There's like, where are you going to host the podcast? There's, do you want to have a website for it? Do you want to have like an Instagram for it? There's just like so many moving parts to creating this. And I just mentioned like 7, but there's like 17 more. And so I feel like I was like, oh, I'm gonna capture these stories. Everyone's gonna care about them because, like, obviously, and people are gonna listen and they're gonna share and they're gonna share and they're gonna share, and it's gonna be wonderful. And that's just what it is. But that like has not been how it has been because there is so much saturation of podcasts out there, and so it's like hard to be like, I guess, distinguished between a whole bunch of other ones, and like that is fine. I personally like am happy to share that like I was getting stressed out about it. I was like, oh no, like who's listening, and like going through the analytics and being like, oh, how many people listen today? But also, I think the answer to that question is like it matters if like you think it matters. I've learned to sort of like chill about it now, and I'm like, okay, is this gonna get me on Oprah? I don't know. Hopefully it does, but
maybe
but and again, I think like Anna said, it's like an ego thing that like you have to decide, like, am I gonna check my ego and be like, oh, this is a project that I'm doing because I'm passionate about it and these stories need to be out there, or is this you trying to like become podcasting superstar, which is fine if that's what you're trying to do, right? It just, I think you need to go into it having like clear expectations of what it is that you're personally trying to get out of it, because otherwise it's going to just be a frustrating process.
And if you could somehow, I think if you could align it with like community support in some way, like tie it to whether it's an organization or a festival or like something where it's just not you in a vacuum. If you could link up with other people who like in your community who want to share it, I think that's a really good strategy too if you're trying to get it out there. Like I feel like just like you had WBRU a little bit, like you found podcasting or like audio storytelling thing, and that was how I met you or like found out about you originally because we were working with them. So like if you could find other people, so you're and by interviewing people too, that's a way you can connect and create community. So so that's my recommendation.
Yeah, be patient with yourself though.
Be patient.
It's what I tell myself every time I'm on like hour 2 of editing and I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, just send it to me next time. I will do it.
I will send it to you right now.
Yeah, I'll do it.
I need help right now.
It's kind of part of my job. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. Yeah. But what was the other question? Oh, there's one more from Luz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can go ahead and read that if you'd like. Great answers, by the way. Thank you. From Luz Jennifer, for both Anna and Gisel. What have been the reactions that you've gotten when sharing your personal truth? For example, feeling like the only Latina in your field or profession, particularly from the Latino community, and how have those reactions impacted the content that you create?
I think for me, people expect my show to be just about Latino people. And I would love that to be my show, but it's not. So that's one thing where I think I want to, like, I feel drawn to, like, I fit in really well. I feel like Caribbean people especially, like, but I have to kind of be like, okay, here's my professional self. So I think people kind of want more from me than I could give them at times. It's like they want me to be everything and I want to be that because I'm a people pleaser by nature, but I have to be like, here's my boundary, and I would love to maybe set up a time to talk about this with you and see if there's, so that's something I have to manage, and I wish I wasn't the only one doing this full time, but I am, and I wish there are more Spanish speaking people in newsrooms, but there aren't. I wish I could help every single person who's asked me for direct aid as well. It's something I get phone calls about, people who are being mistreated at work, people who need places to stay, and the best I can do is connect them to other people. So I'm not ungrateful for that attention at all. I really do appreciate it. I think I wish there were just more people that could help too. So that's I don't know. It's kind of I think it also endears me to people too. If they like know I'm Puerto Rican, they'll like, or if they like find out somehow that my mom is like Irish, and you know, like I think I get kind of pulled into both of these worlds sometimes. So, or if I tell them that my husband is Italian, they're like, oh, okay, you know, like, so I don't know. It's kind of, I think it's like a secret superpower in a lot of ways.
As I kind of alluded to earlier, so I feel like I'm good telling my story on a one-on-one basis. Like I would go as like deep in TMI as possible. I'm like good with that. But capturing my story and telling my story was actually like a really vulnerable experience. And I mentioned earlier that it made me want to vomit, like physically. And for some reason I decided to like release my episode on my 30th birthday because I was like, that's gonna be great. But really what it turned out, really what it was an anxiety producing you know, couple days before my birthday, because it just, you know, I spoke about like how I told y'all about what it felt like and what it was like growing up with like a really depressed mom. I talked about like naysaying people along the way. I talked about my mentor. I talked about failing. I talked about all these things. And I've said and I've shared pieces of those stories with people for years because truly I do believe that it's so important to be able to tell people about your flaws and triumphs together. But hearing them all at once come back at me in my own voice was really challenging because I was like, shit, like I've been through a lot and all of that is like a lot to put out there and like have unsuspecting ears just like listen in on and then therefore maybe have opinions about and then therefore form assumptions of who I am as a person or the value that I bring to any interaction or like things like this. And so instead of it being like a happy, like, oh my God, it's going to be my birthday, I'm going to put my story out there, it was actually like me sitting with my therapist being like, I've never physically had the experience of like wanting to vomit. Like no matter how many standardized tests I've taken, no matter how many crazy patient experiences I've had, like nothing has made me feel the way that I felt when telling and releasing my story than that. And so far, the sort of feedback that I've gotten is that like, wow, that's really like great. And thank you for sharing. And I feel seen in my own story or like, the joke that's not a joke that I shared about shit going down quarterly with my family like has resonated with a lot of people and I get a lot of messages about those experiences and other episodes. And so overall I think that particularly I think the way also that I edited it to make it be the reality that yes, although I've gone through all of these things, I still feel very grateful and like very empowered in the position that I am because I took the time to reflect and to like take up space. So far, like people are like, whoa, cool, like that was great. And how have those reactions impacted the content you create? I think for me, by now y'all know I don't like editing. And for me, what those comments do is convince me that I need to keep telling these stories, right? That I need to keep having conversations with people and putting their stories out there because you really never know like who's gonna listen. And also you never know what those listening ears are bringing to that listening session and how it's going to impact them and all of these things. And I wouldn't say necessarily to focus too much on the outcome of what the story is, because then that leads you to like clam up a little bit about the content creation process. But yeah, I think definitely, even to the earlier question, like more podcasts, more stories of people.
Does that
I
make
will. I
sensitive
just wanted to.
interview? I'm sorry, go ahead. You want to?
I just wanted to say too, not everything has like something coming from more of a journalistic background. It's the opposite, right? Like you never want to share, like you're trained as a journalist.
Right,
never
right.
share you, never ever put you in it. It's always an objective question, which doesn't exist. But like you try to make it about the person that you're talking to at all points, like decenter yourself. And so originally, I think getting to like the second part of that question, like originally I was like, all right, let me try to be a little bit like more in the background and try to be out of this kind of. But I think I've actually, and I really haven't shared that much about myself in my podcast. It's like a really conscious thing because I don't want it to be about me. It's a different podcast, but that's a choice, and I'm warming up to I'm like slowly but surely sprinkling little like things, and that creates trust and warmth between who I'm talking to, especially in this more conversational format, which is again what Gisel does. So like there has to be a back and forth. There has to be like, oh yeah, like I experienced that too. And you don't have to keep that in there necessarily if you edit it, if you're good at editing, right? You can take out that part and just put in their answer because it's about them. So it really depends on like what you're going for and what you want that product to be. And if you're not comfortable sharing, if you're not a TMI person, do not feel like you have to be, if you want to make it about something else, that's cool too. There are tons of really great science podcasts. There are really great political podcasts and historical podcasts. So you can tell other people's stories really well too. So that's just a point that I want to make.
So I'm aware of time. We've got about 5 minutes, and I did want you all to have a chance to plug anything that's coming up. I know you talked about a little bit your next episode, but you want to plug anything? Or yeah, Gisel?
Bye. I am having difficulty getting through this next episode because of the editing process, and Anna apparently is volunteering to help me with. But like I mentioned, the next episode is a great conversation that I had with a trans male med student who shares his experience about what it was like to get gender affirming surgeries, and also his thoughts about being like a future doctor, and sort of whether patients feel comfortable or uncomfortable with him as a provider. That just like adds a whole nother layer to just being an underrepresented med student. And so it's a great conversation that I also get corrected on, which I think is great because we're all just doing our best. And yeah.
Cool. I can't wait to listen to that. To edit it and then listen to it. Send me the session. I'll do it. So the next two, I'll tell you the next 3 episodes of Mosaic. Mosaic airs on the Public Radio 89.3 FM every Saturday and Sunday. Saturdays at 3, Sundays at 3:30, and is available online all the time at mosaicpodcast.org. And
on point with that.
I got every week I'm hitting those promos. Yeah. And so the next 3 episodes, I'll tell you because they're exciting. One is the one coming out this weekend is an interview with Sandra Victorino, who's a Mexican-American first-gen therapist who talks about the just like her life growing up as a child of migrant workers in America and Texas and the Southwest, and then becoming a therapist, and what it's like to offer, like what people don't realize about bilingual, bicultural care, and what just like her experiences with what providers might not be asking people in sessions. So that's this upcoming weekend. And then I'm talking with Professor Bashar Dulaney from Brown about the ongoing Israeli-Palestine conflict, and he's a Palestinian refugee who's born in Saudi Arabia and can really give a lot of great context. And we talk about just like destigmatizing even the word Palestine in polite company. So that's and then the one after that is future Dr. Gisel Bello talking about her amazing podcast, You Are Med, and her life growing up as Afro-Dominicana in Harlem. So those are the next three. One more plug I will say is at the end of July, we're working with the Wilbury Theater to have a community stage at the Fringe Festival, which is an outdoor theater festival. And I'm going to be interviewing people, like a live taping of Mosaic for the last 2 nights of Fringe. Cool. And we're going to have a community stage too. So we're going to have people who, if you want to write an essay about, the prompt is basically like your life in the past year and a half of COVID, specifically looking for non-English speaking voices, people of color, and people from immigrant backgrounds. So that's one thing, and you would get paid to write an essay for us. So that's big time fun stuff. And then we'll also have a COVID confession booth that you could come in at any point during Fringe Festival and record stuff that happened to you during COVID, whether it's funny or terrible, or just yell really loud. And it can be part of our oral history collection project. So that'll the last 2 weeks of July is Fringe Festival. Last weekend will be our Mosaic event.
You have to text me to remind me of that.
Yeah, I'll blast all y'all. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Stuff going, and I wanted to give Jodie and Jillian a chance to plug anything that's coming up. You want to bring back the gallery so we can all see everyone?
You bet. Let's all come back together again. First of all, thank you, Anna and Gisel and Marta, for this wonderful conversation. I had goosebumps at several points, and I can't wait to catch up on all the episodes I haven't gotten to yet. So thank you so much for that inspiring conversation. I'll just say again, we'll get our whatcheerclub.org website up if anyone's interested in checking out what else we have going on. And again, that Podcasting 101, it's probably not as inspiring, but it'll get you kind of like the basic tools that you might need to launch a podcast. And that next online class will be July 15th, I believe, Thursday evening. We'll also get a link to the survey about tonight's event, and we really appreciate your feedback on that. That's also in the chat if you can copy and paste or save that. That would be wonderful. But yeah, I just want to say thanks again, Marta, for hosting this with us. Really wonderful conversation. Gisel and Anna. Hopefully more to come.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yep. And I want to thank Anna and I want to thank Gisel for sharing your world of podcasting and also part of your personal lives too. That was part of what I was hoping people could learn, what led you to not just podcasting, to be who you are right now. So thanks for all our listeners, our viewers. I only see names, but thank you for joining. Okay.
Yeah, thank you all. Yeah.
Have a good night.
Yeah,
have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you.